So we're here today to talk about the value of a broker in your negotiations. And I'm here with Monica Enloe and Erin McGrane in our brokerage department to share a little bit more about the value they provide their clients. Erin, would you like to start?
Sure. Well, I think there's several roles that the broker can play, but one of the most important ones I think that comes up in my work over and over is the communicator. So I think it's an essential role that there can be a third party between, for instance, your landlord or your owner and the client. And oftentimes setting the tone of the communication is really valuable. And then sometimes with an inexperienced client that say maybe hasn't been through build up before, or it's their first foray into buying a commercial property, actually just the actual terminology, like being able to explain that. So without making anyone feel like, it's a silly question or a dumb question, to be able to reassure people and make sure that everybody has the knowledge they need. That role comes up over and over again. And sometimes the landlord, or the owner or the buyer and the seller almost speak two different languages because they come from a different point of view and have a different agenda. And oftentimes we are in the middle of that communication. And I think that's one of the most important roles that we can serve.
Great. How about you, Monica?
Sure. So I 100% agree with everything Erin says. I think we are constantly being interpreters for our clients. And part of that interpretation is managing their expectations. And one of the largest ways we do that is through providing concrete market data and market knowledge to help them understand where each party is coming from and to negotiate the best deal for our client.
Great. So ladies, tell me a little bit more how this has helped you overcome mistrust between landlords and tenants. I heard you talk a lot about communication, and I'm sure that's a really valuable piece of the puzzle.
Well, I think sometimes, depending, everybody's experiences are different, and they may have had an experience in the past where it didn't go the way that they wanted. So, for example, there might be, a seller who has had a bad experience in the past. So I think being able to be transparent about that. I'm thinking of a particular experience where this person went into the transaction sort of having this feeling like everybody was trying to take advantage of them. And you can probably talk a little more about that, Monica, but, being able to bring down the emotional side of that and to say, hey, they're not trying to take advantage of you, and this is why, to Monica's point. So we bring in market comps, we show them what's actually happened in that neighborhood, we show them similar transactions that have happened, so we can show them from a non-emotional kind of way where that person is coming from. And that has changed a lot of people's minds about how they feel about the transaction. And that makes the whole thing go a lot more smoothly.
So Monica, how do you provide resources to your clients throughout the process?
A lot of the resources we provide come in the form of concrete market data and general market knowledge that we have learned just by doing transactions in the market. And I'll give you an example of that. We recently negotiated a building in the Crossroads, and the offer came in significantly lower than what the client was expecting. And so we used our resources from CoStar, which is a database that's popular for brokers to use, alongside calling on a relationship we have with a commercial appraiser to show comps of other buildings in the neighborhood that sold, and negotiated a price more in line with our client's expectations for the pricing. And because we had concrete knowledge that showed this is what the market will bear, the buyer didn't push back. He said, okay, I agree with you. You proved it out, and I'll pay the price. And that's a big piece of the puzzle for us, is being able to provide the concrete data. Another piece of it is just providing market knowledge for how transactions typically will go. Another example we have is we had a client who wanted to lease a building that was for sale. And they thought by going directly to the seller to negotiate a lease rate than waiting for somebody to purchase the building and negotiating a lease with that person. They thought that because the seller had lower debt service on the building than what a buyer would have. And so he thought, oh, well, if they need to get a 10% return on the building and they only owe $200,000 on it, then they'll give me a lower lease rate. And that's not how it works. And he didn't understand that. And so we use our market knowledge to kind of say to him, that's not how this is going to work. And here is what rent is for 4 other buildings in a 4-block radius. And this is what you should expect to pay. And just through the process of explaining to him what happened with other properties around him, he understood that that building was a little out of reach for him.
Yeah, that's a great example, Monica. And I think another side of that is the resources of our relationships. So oftentimes someone will say, well, how did landlord X do it when he leased up all that stuff along that corridor? How did he do it? And because we have these relationships and basically insider knowledge that other people wouldn't have, we can actually share that and say, well, this is how they did it over here. That, you want to know the mystery, here it is. And they're like, oh, that's great. Is that useful to me or not? Might I take that example? And that just comes out of our relationship, which I think is one of our best resources.
Once you get to the point where you're under contract on a building, those relationships and that market knowledge come even to play even more to simplify the transaction between, referring lenders, appraisals, inspections, who to call to do a phase 1, which title company should you use. All of those things can be a major time suck if you don't know who to call. And that's a role that we play as well.
Absolutely. If you've got an existing relationship, for instance, with someone who's doing a phase 1, you say, call that guy and tell him that I sent you. And that just speeds it through. It's just like every other business. It's those relationships. People like to work with people they know and trust. And so if a client comes to us, they can know that we have people that we know and trust and that know and trust us. And so they then get the advantage of those relationships by having a relationship with us.
Tell me how you de-escalate emotional responses and tone in your transactions.
Well, we'd like to say that never happens, but it does. Some transactions go really smoothly and everything goes fine, but sometimes they don't. And it can be a conversation between, I'm thinking we had a client where there were 2 lawyers that just simply could not get along, one from each side. And every time they were talking, then the whole deal got heated up again. So then we'd have to come back and kind of talk everybody back down. You want to talk a little bit more about that, Monica, about what happens when it doesn't go quite right?
Well, I think part of the value of working in such a collaborative environment with other brokers is that you can take a second and think through the anger or the mistrust or the ego or whatever it is that's driving the transaction to kind of start to go sour, and talk with your team and kind of de-escalate yourself and understand what the root of their concern is and communicate what the root of their concern is and not the emotional part of their concern. And that again is us kind of playing interpreter, and kill them with kindness is something that my parents used to say all the time to me. And I think that that's a big part of what we do too, is when people start to kind of puff their chest and get concerned that the other person is taking advantage of them and they get angry about it. And our role is to de-escalate that. And sometimes that means that we have to de-escalate it within ourselves before we interpret it in the way that needs to be interpreted to the client.
Yeah. It sounds like it's really hard for an owner or a landlord to negotiate directly with the buyer or the tenant without some of those emotional items seeping up.
Yeah,
it can be. And I think a piece of that also, the value of the role that we play as well, is that there's no requirement our client doesn't feel the need to have an immediate answer to a question. If a tenant is asking for something that's beyond what the landlord is comfortable providing, they're not talking directly and there's not a discomfort with saying no. There's a person in between that could be the person that says no. And it gives either party a little breathing room to think through what the other one is asking without feeling the pressure of having to answer immediately. And that's another role that we play, is just to give each party a little bit of breathing room to think through what it is they're getting into. And by getting to the root of it, we can often come up with a solution. And one example of that is we had a landlord who had really strict financial criteria for a tenant because the landlord was going to provide a significant amount of build out for them. And the tenant was hesitant to provide the level of detailed financials that the landlord required. And what it came down to was that landlord had to have his bank approve the tenant improvement dollars that he was going to give the tenant. And so our solution was for the tenant to send his financials directly to the lender and skip the landlord. Because if the lender approved it, then the landlord would approve it. The tenant thought the landlord was being nosy and wanted to know all about how wealthy he was so he could negotiate the deal differently.
Yes.
And the landlord didn't understand why the tenant was so hesitant to provide financials, because if he could afford the space, why wouldn't he just give it up? Why wouldn't he give up his financials? So by getting to the root of the problem, we found a solution for it. And that really is a huge part of the role that we play.
Very good feedback. So ladies, in final thoughts, do you guys want to share anything else about your perspective on the value of a broker in your third-party negotiating?
Real estate is a really big decision. Buying and selling real estate, leasing a space for your business, growing your business, those are all huge life decisions. And no one wants to go into a situation that they don't feel comfortable with or don't feel like they have all of the information. And our role is to provide all of the information and to make sure our clients are making decisions that make them feel excited about what they're doing and make them feel like they're going to be successful at what they're doing. And that's the feel good part of it for us. It is all about the economics, but at the end of the day, we're here to make sure that our clients are making smart decisions, and we're here to provide the information we need to provide so they feel comfortable with those decisions.
Yeah, so that each side is making an informed decision that they feel good about. And if it turns out that we walk away from a deal because after careful consideration and after looking at the comps and, talking with other people, the person walks away, if that's the best decision, then that's the best decision. And that to have people that you can rely on, that you feel like aren't trying to push you one way or the other in the deal, that's super valuable right there.
All right. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you.